Welcome to Patty's Aquatics.
Welcome to Patty's Aquatics. My name is Adam and welcome to the fish room. So over the last year or so, if you haven't been following my channel, I've been doing a little testing in here. I revamped my fish room probably last year around this time, and I had all dirty tanks and I tore down a lot of them. Majority of them, I kept like 2 I think at that time. And what I did is I replaced them all with different substrates, sand gravel mixes, and I've been using different fertilization methods throughout them. Really what the goal is to see what is the best substrate and what is the best way to fertilize your aquariums to get the best planted aquarium that I can. So that was my goal this year, and I want to really share with you guys what I've learned and what I've seen doing it. So before I start, I'll just say that for fertilizers, what I used was all Aquarium Co-op products. I'm a firm believer in their products, and I really didn't want to use multiple different fertilizers because I think that could have confused really some of the outcomes for me. So to start off with, any of the liquid fertilizer I used was the Easy Green from Aquarium Co-op, and any of the root tabs I used obviously were the root tabs from Aquarium Co-op, which you can find at aquariumcoop.com. Anyway, so to start this off, really, let's start with the dirty tank. Now, the dirty tank is this one right here behind me. Now, this one I've had up for 6 years. This was what I kind of judged everything else by because I had been keeping dirty tanks for quite a few years before this. I guess we could say, if you want to break it down, what probably grows plants the best, I think right off the bat, you'd have to say dirty tanks are probably one of the most ferocious plant growers when it comes to planted tanks in general that I've ever had. Well, obviously because the substrate's just packed full of nutrients, and it's really going to help those plants explode. But there are some cons to dirty tanks, in my opinion. If you follow my channel, you see a lot of them within the last year or so. I really, in my opinion, don't believe a dirty tank is really beginner friendly. I think the explosion of plants is cool, but there are so many nutrients within that aquarium that you can have algae issues and other different issues like that. And if you're someone that's not familiar with plants or familiar with planted tanks, that it could be very confusing and hard and potentially get them to give up, where I think some of the other substrates and ways of doing it are more beginner friendly. Now, that being said, I think planted tanks are probably, I think it's a tank that people should try if you're into plants and into aquariums at some point in the hobby, if you're someone that indulges into more than one tank, but that's just my opinion. But the next thing I want to talk about really is some of the other tanks that I had where, you know, I had some that were just sand, like I said, some gravel and some sand gravel mixes. Now, what I found a lot was, let's start with just the sand, because I had 2 of them that I set up with sand substrates and plants, but I did not add fertilizers because I wanted to have a couple tanks that had no fertilizers at all, and see really how they reacted that way. And I would think the outcomes were pretty much what I thought. Now, the sand that I used was a beach sand, which was very fine. And if you've been following my channel, you see I'm kind of getting away from that now because I've been really having issues growing my plants in it, really because of, like, in my opinion, the compaction of that onto the root system and not getting flow. Now, in my one tank, which I'll show some footage of, I had my Medaka rice, or my King Yama Medaka rice fish in my orange ones. I had lots of Ludwigi in here, but I also had Crips, so I didn't add root tabs or liquid fertilizer in this aquarium. And what I found really was the Ludwigi, it didn't matter. They're water column feeders. They're going to pull the nutrients from the water column from the fish. They loved it. They grew like mad. But those Crips, that's kind of what I was expecting from these plants with no root tabs in this sand substrate. They really did not grow. They stayed pretty much dormant the entire year or so this tank was set up, and never really grew at all, to be quite honest with you, and that's kind of what I expected from it. Now, my other tank that I had that did not have any fertilizer in it was my axolotl tank, which was my 55-gallon. Now, that one I had mostly just Anibius and some dwarf sage in it. And that one as well, it really did not grow much at all, but there was other circumstances when it came to that tank. The substrate was very thick, and Two, I didn't have a lot of high light in there because it was an axolotl tank, but none of the plants really survived in that, so I don't know if I can really include that in the actual outcome of what I was really testing. But the tank with those rice fish definitely proved to me that I believe that really the crypts need some type of nutrient source at that root level for them to grow. But this is where I got kind of confusing. Now, I had two other tanks that I had some sand gravel mixes in. Now, those were two tanks I had up on my racks up here. It's my rainbow shiner tank here, and the other tank I used to have over here that was like a community tank. Now, my rainbow shiner tank here, I have a sand gravel ledge up top, and it breaks down to sand at the bottom. Now, I have crypts down there on the top and the bottom of it. Now, this tank, I put root tabs in and liquid fertilizer. I did both. I put root tabs underneath the crypts, and they all grew great. If I can try to show some differences between when I first planted them considering to now, the plants had a huge growth within that year compared to the other ones in that other Medaka rice fish tank that did not grow at all. So the root tabs really made a difference, and in the sand here too, because at the bottom of that level it's just sand, where the top is just a large amount of gravel, and both have grown very good in that. So I believe really, obviously, the fertilizers worked in there and that system worked. Now, that other community tank I had, that's where things got a little different. Now, that one I just put liquid fertilizer in, no root tabs at all, and I also had crypts in there. Now, strange enough, the crypts grew great in that tank as well. They were growing great until I had to tear that tank down because I had some sickness in it. And so that's where the kind of like, well, why did this one grow better than the one I added zero fertilizers at all? Now, I realize liquid fertilizer is going to help a little bit for these crypts, but I know they're mostly root feeders. They really love to pull their nutrients from the roots. So I did have in that community tank, it was a little bit of gravel mixed in with it, so it was like a sand gravel mix. So my thinking is really having that gravel in there mixed with it helped kind of lessen that compaction from the sand on the root system, which allowed some of the nutrients to get down to the root system. That's the only thing I could think of as why the crypts grew so well in there. But that too, that tank did great as well. All the plants were growing in it. Everything looked great. It was actually one of my favorite scape tanks I had before I had to tear it down. And so what I learned with those are obviously the fertilizers work. The fertilizers worked with sand and sand gravel mixes. Now I want to move over to a little bit of just gravel aquariums. Now, these two tanks I'm going to show you now, these were just gravel, like I said, and I only used root tabs. There was no liquid fertilizers that I put into these aquariums. Now, mostly because they were all pretty much root feeding plants in them for the most part. I had lots of crypts and I had swords. And what I found obviously over the year is that they exploded in growth, especially that taller tank here with this this sword that I have. It's not an Amazon sword. I can't remember which one it's called, but in the crypts I had in here, they filled out tremendously within that year. And then my other tank here that had my CPDs in it, those crypts all melted when I redid that tank, but I had been putting root tabs in there religiously and they started to come back. Now, it was a slow growth. Crypts are slow growers, but they were coming back from those root tabs as well. Now, one thing I should note is that the duration I did use my fertilizers. What I did was once a month I added root tabs to all the plants that needed them. And then once a week, I would add my liquid fertilizer to the tanks that needed the liquid fertilizers. And I stayed on that pretty religiously. Now, I did miss a little bit here or there periodically, but that's pretty much the schedule I stayed on. So what I found with these gravel tanks, by the way, is that I found that gravel tanks just worked tremendously great for me when it came to growing plants. And the water was crystal clear in those tanks too, which I thought was really cool. Now, the other tank that I want to talk about is my puffer tank. Now, that one was just sand, and what I was doing was liquid fertilizer and root tabs in there, and I've been documenting that tank for quite a while. And if you've been following my channel, you know I've had nothing but issues with it, and I really believe, I think there's multiple issues with it, but I think one of them was that sand and how thick I had it in there, and really the compaction on those roots, because none of the crypts grew. I would put root tabs underneath those crypts for the entire year, and they were stagnant. They never grew at all. The Dorsage and back Sagittaria barely ever grew. I think I got maybe 3 runners out of it. The one sword I put in there grew a little bit, which was good, but that was about it. That tank just did not want to grow plants. There was obviously issues, underlying more issues in there besides just that, but that's kind of what I've seen over the last year. So with everything that I've seen, what is the best substrate and best fertilization method, in my opinion, to grow probably the best planted tank? So what is the best substrate? Well, I can't really answer that for you. That's something that you got to figure out on your own. Because there is no for sure clear-cut answer. It really, every individual hobbyist has their own preferences and their own likes. What I can really do is highly recommend is you set up a few tanks if you haven't already, and try different substrates and see which one best fits you. I can say what I like. Someone else will say they like dirted tanks best. Some will say they like sand. Some will say below that I don't like any of them. I like bare bottom tanks or whatever, you know what I mean? What I can tell you though is what I found, it was what is my personal favorite out of all of them, and that is gravel. Quite honestly, it didn't surprise me, because it was really what I started with back when I got into this hobby many decades ago. And there's another tank here, this White Cloud tank I didn't talk about. It's another instance. Gravel. I had liquid fertilizer and root tabs in it, and it grew great. The plants grew tremendously. And I really feel gravel is also a substrate where you could probably get away without using fertilizers if you wanted to as well. I mean, some people want to call it an open sewer, but to me, really isn't every fish tank a tank that collects waste and things along that nature. You use that to fuel the bacteria within your aquarium. And I just love that the flow with gravel, you can really get that flow through there and oxygenate the root system, and you don't get that with sand. Sand can be very thick and compact, and like I said, compact those roots. But in the end, you can grow plants in any substrate that you like. It doesn't matter. You just have to figure out the best way of doing it. Like I said, if you want to go for a tank that's just going to grow plants and grow them fast, dirty tanks is the way to do it. But like I said, with that, you got to understand that there are other variables as well that come with it because of those high concentrated amount of nutrients that you have in that aquarium. Like I said, sand itself, I've grown plants and had a heavily planted aquarium with sand itself before in the past. Grew great, but I just really have found that gravel really has been what I'm looking for now. And if I ever switch over any more tanks, which I don't plan on it right now, I will go gravel more because I feel like it's more versatile. It's something that you can go without fertilizers if you wanted to, but you also have that option, and that flow that you can get through the gravel, I think, is huge. So that's my opinion anyway, and I'm sticking with it. Now, best fertilizing method, it really depends, quite honestly, on the plants. If you have a heavy tank with lots of crypts or swords or root feeding plants, you're going to probably want to stick some root tabs in there to really have them thrive. If you have an under gravel filter system, that's another thing to look at. Because that could be where maybe you just need liquid fertilizers if you want anything for those heavy root feeding plants because of that. But those are all things to kind of look at and just really feel out like what is the best situation for the tank that you want to keep, and that's what's most important. People can't sit there and tell you what's the best of this and what's the best of that, but in the end you have to know what's best for you, what's best for your fish, what's best for your tank, and really what's best for the area that you're in, because like I said, what works for me may not work for you. So anyway, that's what I found in the last year. I found that everything works. I know it's really not this big outcome, but everything works, and really it's about finding what best fits what you want. Like I said, probably 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 times in this video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and stick around for more, because I will be revealing my big river tank sometime down the future here and show you guys more updates of everything I've been doing on this downsizing project. And at some point I'll do an entire fish room tour and show you guys every tank and what's going on. But till then, hope to see you again next week here at Patty's Aquatics.
Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time here at Patty's Aquatics.